Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the Kodiak Shack podcast. Today, I was able to chat with Brian Streem from Vermeer, which, I'll be honest, I'm recording this after the recording, and he blew my mind today. The technology that's out there is amazing. Brian is the founder and CEO of Vermeer, which is a VR, XR, AR, ISR, information surveillance and reconnaissance, drones, and overall innovation company. So that is being a part or being brought on board to work with the ABMS or air battle management systems of the future. So some pretty cool tech there. So I hope you enjoy the show. Super exciting stuff. I was very happy to get a chat with him. But please always like, subscribe, and share the show. And then please donate. Donations are available in the show notes. And we appreciate our listeners because you have been amazing, and we appreciate everybody that has donated. So Brian, I appreciate you being here. And what were you working on specifically in the Hollywood sector with cameras and everything?
Yeah, sure. So I guess I've always been very kind of interested in, I know it sounds a little kind of niche, but I've always been very interested by like the movement of cameras through space. Um, and that's like what a movie is. A movie is like someone's like usually moving a camera to kind of like film a scene. And like, there are, shots in movies like, in Goodfellas, like going, these long takes going through the Copacabana. Like when you see like a long shot in a movie, like the camera's moving, you like, or in Birdman or, when it's like one long unbroken shot, like that's always very sexy and appealing to me. So I've always been very interested in kind of like, how do you like do that, efficiently and easily? Um, and I ended up building, so before this company that I'm building now, Vermeer, I had another company that we did drone cinematography. So I was probably the largest company in the world doing Hollywood drone cinematography because the drone was a very good way to kind of move a camera. And I heard about like the drone. I was always more interested about like moving that camera sensor through space. Like that was like I'm not like an aviation person. I'm like a camera nerd. So I don't really care about the drone. I care about like what is the camera looking at and how do we get the camera to that location. Um, so I started to build in 2017. I put on like AR goggles for the first time, and I thought, oh, this is how we should be moving the drones through space through like this like augmented reality interface. So I started to kind of pivot away from doing it as a service and started to build this very exotic software where I could kind of pre-visualize my drone missions, do this kind of like God's eye view. So it's essentially like you put on goggles, you see like a 3D, like a Google Earth 3D holographic map of an area, and then you kind of direct the camera in this like virtual world on what you want the camera to see. So, a lot of people thought this was like very crazy. It was very science fiction. It was very like Minority Report, which is like a movie I like, a movie I love. And like all the stuff that like I've seen in like sci-fi movies, what happened was then we got selected to be at this Techstars program. And as I spoke to, and I just assumed the government had a crashed UFO that they were reverse engineering, and and quite frankly, they had all of this stuff. Um, as I started to meet people, I'm like, oh, they don't have any of this really cool stuff, so we should build it for them. Was kind of like and it just so happens that been a big fan of like sci-fi, Hollywood, military technology, and so are people in the military, and they're also asking themselves, how come we don't have any of this cool stuff? So that
Yeah.
was kind of my thing. I'm like, okay, well, we should try to build all this stuff for them because who doesn't want this? Um, so that was kind of my a little bit of my journey. And then as I started to work with the customers, I spoke to a lot of people. I asked them like what their problems were, and I kind of like learned that, oh, they don't want to do it with one drone, they want to do it with a swarm of drones. Oh, and those drones we want to find people holding guns, or we want the drones to autonomously do this or autonomously find particular license plates. I also found out that like a feature of this like AR VR drone mission planning tool that we were building, which was like this like kind of GPS denied capability. That that's everyone started to talk to me about GPS denied. So I kind of realized that through talking to people, and I probably spoke to 2,000 people over 12 months. I kind of like learned that this feature of the product that might be its own product because so many people want this GPS. And I, coming from the commercial world, I had no idea the GPS denied, GPS spoofed was such an issue. So I kind of started with like a problem my commercial customers had, and then I just listened more to like my defense customers to kind of like continue to build these products.
Yeah, and I think that's what I assume this happens kind of everywhere, but specifically in warfare, you think every technological advantage has a counter tactic. So you have one of those situations where we have dumb bombs, which are unguided bombs, and then those unguided bombs are not accurate. And then we now get GPS guided bombs. So now the bomb has a GPS kit on it. It's going to guide it to its target. And then the enemy's like, well, I'm just going to take away your bomb's ability to gain GPS. So now we have a tactic, and then we have a counter tactic, and then we have a counter tactic. And this just goes round and round for decades and decades. So it makes sense why, hey, swarm technology becomes available. And they say, well, we're just going to knock out your ability to either communicate with that swarm or have the swarm communicate with GPS. So I hope that becomes a reality, because there are a lot of problems when you're talking about having the ability for air superiority, air supremacy, and some of that is what degradation or contested degraded operations the enemy can throw at.
Yeah, I mean, I think like the so there's a lot of tech, like the DoD has a lot of technology, is what I've learned, but it seems like they're doing a lot of new versions of the same old thing, um, which is like kind of like M code or something, like M code is like their APNT GPS thing, which is, it seems like they're trying to come up with um, more encryption proof versions of it, but like it seems like really hard to have a radical kind of breakthrough. So a lot of the stuff that my company is doing, we're doing like computer vision aided stuff.
I think there's two aspects to that. One is every single military member you have, I guess not every, but the vast majority, to innovate, to work in a think tank, all of those are secondary jobs. None of them are, hey, you are hired to think outside the box and learn new ways or figure out a way to do this thing with a wildly different technology. Like you said, we're not using GPS anymore. We're using some different tech that didn't exist before. So we don't just need to bolster GPS. We just need to change the entire way we approach this. So that's why I think it's wonderful that our military members reach out to people like yourself, who literally, it sounds like, especially working in Hollywood, that's your everyday, is how do we make something that hasn't happened before happen? Because this is what we're trying. We're trying to achieve that visual amazement of the audience because we did something that hadn't been done before. So I think that's why I love the innovation space, because it is leveraging people like yourself with the smarts in areas that I never even knew existed, that to make the next fight more feasible and winnable.
Yeah, I mean, certainly a lot of people don't even understand like the art of possible. Like that's been my it has blown a lot of people's minds in the defense space, that they had like, oh, like you have no idea that such a thing were even possible. And I guess I also kind of like want to we could like rag on the DoD and like their but like the fact of the matter is like people at the Air Force, like AFWorks, I mean, they are dramatically changed. I mean, like there is I mean, I am a fruit of those labors, and my company, like without them and like kind of what they've dedicated and and the resources they put behind it, like I never would have got into this space and never would have figured it out. So they are making an impact. This stuff takes a long time too. It's a grind. It's a grind for me, and I shouldn't even be complaining. We've been fairly successful, very successful in 2 to 3 years of working with the DoD, but I still, I like to complain. But like, there's people who haven't been, and they're complaining too. But like, uh, it's a grind. But there are people who are like passionate about kind of getting this innovation stuff. I mean, to work. I mean, the kid. I think I kind of stress this to everyone who asks me like, how do you do this stuff? Is like, you need to ask a lot of people. If you solve a problem big enough that everyone is having, people should be dying to want to give you their money. So you just need to kind of like find a problem that's big enough that's worth solving, and you don't have to sell anything. You just need to kind of find the right person who could like sign the check. And that onto itself is like a complicated process within the DoD, like the acquisition, like getting something on contract. You need a program of record, you need an acquisition vehicle, you need a requirement, you need like these like trifecta of things to come together to make it work. But it becomes way easier if you're actually solving a problem that people really, really have, and that's a requirement.
And I think some of that is the nature of previous, and we've talked to this a lot of times on the podcast, but the nature of previous acquisitions was very cumbersome because it was built in the 80s. And so it didn't take into account all the technological advantage we have now today, and onboarding things was not as common. So now in this very dynamic world of onboarding and acquisitions, it doesn't fit. But I agree. I mean, the bigger problem you solve, the more people are going to be on board. It's just how to onboard people like that. One thing was we kind of talked before we started recording, but the authority to operate. So obviously you're building some software, obviously with these VR and XR programs. So how have you seen just kind of getting your software and hardware used and utilized? Has that been an issue to get the authority to operate?
So the authority to operate. So this term, can you just like describe more like what does that mean exactly? I've heard of it, but I'm not 100% sure.
And maybe you haven't had to deal with it just yet, but a lot of times what ends up happening is if someone has software or hardware that wants to get on the military network or be in a classified space, you have to be approved to actually access.
Yeah, so we have had to do this. I kind of gave this to someone else at my company to deal with. So I'm actually
Nice.
not, I just said so I'm actually not 100% sure what we had to do. But
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, listen, there are certainly challenges working with the DoD. I mean, we have to, there's 3 people on my company that have TS clearances. I'm trying to get a TS clearance right now. We're gonna need to get a cleared, a cleared facility. Um, uh, uh, we're gonna have to firewall our stuff. We're gonna have to make, there are certainly procedures that we've had to go. I think we've had to go through this with some of our contracts, the authority to operate stuff. I'm just like not familiar with exactly what we had to do, but yeah, it's a pain. It's a huge pain in the ass.
What? And
There's
that's
no way to slice it or dice it. Yeah.
Well, and that's exactly your authority to operate. So all of those things, you have to have the
Okay.
clearances, you have to write your code in the correct manner, the hardware has to be certified. So all those hoops, so people wonder like, oh, why is it so difficult to work with the military? And it's understandable. These things are secret. You want to keep them secret, but it's like, wow, you need a lot of people on board just working on meeting the stipulations and the requirements.
Yes. I mean, the fact of the matter is like, yes, like there's obviously a reason for all that stuff, and it's a very good reason for all that stuff. But I tend to, I say this a lot. If it's hard for us, it's hard for everyone. Competition is fear. But we have to have, you have to have tenacity. This is what and you also have to believe that the pot of gold, quite frankly, at the end of the rainbow, and like the reason for is like big enough um, to warrant, as a small business startup owner who's raised money and stuff like that. Like I'm quite frankly, I'm thinking about like the responsibility to grow the company. I have to think like, all right, well, if we get this secured facility that's $20,000 a month, it's a lot of money. And I
Yeah.
think that is what I was quoted recently for like a rented skiff. It's like, okay, is someone going to give me $100 million if I rent this $20,000 thing a month? I need to have a reasonable degree of certainty that that is around the corner or will happen. And I also kind of, so, as a small business, you're kind of faced with like you know, like you somehow need to like get, it's a pretty good idea to close the deal before spending all the money to get the deal. So like you got to like do a
Yeah.
little bit of both at the same time. But just make sure that if you get that contract that requires those requirements, I think you do have the opportunity to like catch up, but you better be in some place where you've already contacted the vendors and you can already put that stuff in place. So you can't be like a disaster. That's some stuff that we're like currently going through, is like having discussions about like how far ahead should we plan for our success, of when like we're required to go to have like a skiff and things of that nature.
And that's kind of the thing I've seen a lot of companies who want to work on classified programs and create products in the classified space, is that they are, it's pretty much just to start working there, you have to commit all those funds before you end up losing, or even before you even get the awarded the contract. So that's kind of tough to work there. One of the things,
Yeah.
so
The
we've, oh, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, the other thing that I don't know if people do enough of it, like I have like you don't even need a lot of advice, but you need to have like one advisor who's like really good, who's like really legit retired colonel, or someone who's like fun to work with, really smart, cheap, and just loves the game. Who's like willing to provide like you insights into like, is it like too early to be renting this skiff, or can I like wait? I'm not an expert in it. I can't be an expert at everything. So you kind of need to make sure you have somebody who's sitting on your Slack channel or your Teams channel who you could like text message quickly and get like some sort of answer to those types of questions.
Well, that, and then a lot of those people still have their security clearances from when they were previously in. So now you have one guy or one person who already has a, multi tens of thousands of dollars clearance that you can easily, use there. So yeah, there's goodness there. With so JADC2 or ABMS, whichever terminology you'd like to use. So what do you guys, if you want to kind of dig into it a little bit, or I can explain it, can you explain to everyone what that would be, ABMS or JADC2?
So I have spoken to the program managers of that, and I don't even think they know what it is, quite frankly. I mean, that was kind of my impression 2 years ago, is like, it was kind of like everything you wanted it to be and more. It was some sort of like magic. That was like it was like everything in the kitchen sink. It felt like some sort of common. I'll try to distill it down to a simple guy's perspective. It seems to be some sort of
Yeah.
common tool to visualize and kind of command and control sensor data, robots, planes, ground vehicles. It seemed like a very large, complicated, common operating picture of something of that nature. Um, that may or may not be what it is. That's what I kind of have garnered from it. But I guess, Vader, if you want to explain it to me, if I'm close or not close, that would be helpful from your perspective.
Yeah, and so I'm definitely not an expert on it, but I think you did a very good job of explaining in those terms, because so right now let's talk about the battle space. The battle space is a combination of single aircraft moving in concert, either 2 to 4 ships, so 4 aircraft, 2 aircraft working together. And then you have, beyond that, single aircraft, and then those 2 to 4 aircraft, you now have the rest of the aircraft fighting together. So these are heavy aircraft, these are fighter aircraft, these are bomber aircraft, these are jammer aircraft, these are all of those aircraft are all working together right now, just like we did, I don't know, 40 years ago. They all communicate via the radio, literally talking on the radio to one another and providing information. There is a data link that is used across a lot of platforms, but right now the radio is king. And if you have time on the radio, you get to talk. If you don't, you don't. So what JADC2 or ABMS is the same thing, just different acronyms for them, wants to make this massive interconnected link cloud, whatever you want to call it, where they all work together. And instead of sending voice to one another, you can just send messages via link or just a visual depiction of something, whether it's an airborne asset, whether it's something on the ground, that they can then use to cue their sensors or fly to put a bomb on, whatever it may be. So all of this, and I think this is the problem, because this is what we had problems with in the past, is we go to a prime and we ask for everything, everything in the kitchen sink. And the problem we end up running into is it's probably too big of an ask to do it well. Right. And I hope ABMS is not that way, because what ends up happening is we're going to ask for so much. We're going to ask for so much interconnectivity between 5th gen, 4th gen, the AWACS, so the controllers out there. We're going to try to integrate the B-52s, the C-130s, other countries maybe. And at some point, it's going to be so much of a mountain of a project. I'm worried about it. But so what are you kind of working on specifically in that larger group?
So I think that we kind of have several technologies that are ABMS applicable depending on which way the ABMS wind blows. So we have a tool that we call AugNav, where we could essentially, it's kind of like a drone swarm for group, 1 through 3, let's just say. So you could essentially see a 3D in virtual reality. You could kind of see like a 3D environment of a location, and then you could essentially like assign areas of interest. So it's kind of like, in this area of interest, I want the drone swarm to look for a particular person holding a gun, or I want to look for a particular license plate. I want to look for something. And then when you find it, I want you to notify me, drop a munition on it. I want you to do kind of a decision tree. I want you to do this behavior of some sort. So it's kind of like this like virtual reality or augmented reality way to make a recipe for your swarm mission. Okay. And then once you do it, we have we're doing a lot of stuff with computer vision, which is essentially trying to recreate how humans navigate. It's like, oh, that's a lamp. Okay. That's a lamp. That's a chair. So the cool thing about computer vision is you don't need to emit anything. You could use passive sensors. Your eyeballs see something, they tell your brain, I know that's a chair and it's sitting in the corner of the room. You don't need to emit LiDAR or anything like that. We're just using the photons from the sun that are bouncing off of the chair, hitting the back of my eyeball, going into my brain. So it's great in that it's a universal language, light. You don't need protocols. You don't need you don't need fancy Gen 1, Gen 2, which is photons of light bouncing around. So one of the technologies for our for our kind of mission planning swarm capability is something we call VPS, which is a vision-based navigation system. So the way it works is on board the platform. So let's say it's a drone or multiple drones or a ground vehicle or even ATAC. We have a version for ATAC. We compare what the camera on the drone is looking at so the video feed goes to a little computer that's on board, and the little computer is the size of like this. The video feed goes to a little computer with our algorithms on it. Attached to that GPU, that little computer, is a little hard drive that has a pre-existing 3D map of the environment on it. You could fit an entire map of the Ukraine on a 4 terabyte solid state USB key, and that's plugged into the computer. So essentially, the algorithm is looking at what the full motion video is looking at and comparing it to the pre-existing 3D map that's on the hard drive. So when we find the most similar instance of it, we're essentially able to do a map match and tell you the position of the sensor. So people love this because you don't need GPS. You don't need to emit anything. It's all passive. You can't be spoofed. It can't be jammed. And the other cool thing is that you could look at targets on the ground and you could identify their position without GPS. So you could say that car is at AB. So we're comparing the picture that the drone is taking, or the drones, to the full motion, to the, the car to the map, and the map to the video, and that, so we could deduce the position of the target just through computer vision without any GPS or SATCOM, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, radio, or anything like that. And then the other thing that we're doing is we could now take the all these different so imagine if you have like a swarm, so you have 20, 30 different cameras floating around a location. That's a lot of bandwidth, that's a lot of pixels to move. So what we're doing is on the platform itself, at the GPU, we call this on the edge, which is a fancy way of saying like you're doing a lot of computationally complicated stuff next to the camera. We're not transmitting all these pixels back to a ground station. What we're doing is we're saying, hey, at XYZ position, there's a car. At ABC position, there's a person. At ZYX position, there's another car. And what we're doing is we're then just transmitting that little bit of metadata. So, instead of millions of pixels, we're transmitting like these 5 different numbers, 3 for location, 1 for the fact that it's a car. And then we're populating this like 3D map in real time. And this is done very quickly. So that pre-existing 3D map that we have that we're getting from satellite images, that's kind of preloaded. So now we could kind of generate this like really cool kind of sensor fused real-time 3D movie, like a God's eye view of the environment, using nothing but kind of optical, cheap off the shelf camera sensors or EO, IR camera systems. And the cool thing about it is like we're communicating through vision. So we're not using any sort of traditional kind of, RF. Well, we are using RF, but we're reducing the amount of bandwidth by 99%, quite frankly. So I guess if you really had to ask me, like, how does this apply to ABMS? I guess my sincere answer is, well, you'd have to ask them. It's they're the ones who selected us for it. And I'm still waiting, quite frankly, on some clarity on exactly how they intend to use it. But from what I've heard, there's like enough meat on that bone where it seems like they want to use it for something.
Yeah, I would say, so while you were talking, I had a lot of ideas of what that would look like. So say a person sitting in a fighter jet like myself, or somebody sitting at a mission planning like a KOC, which is overseeing the entire war. If that data gets sent back, now we just have, little points with GPS locations with a triangle on it, or a yellow square where it's like, hey, this yellow square could be bad. Triangle's definitely bad, and then now we just have the whole battle space, so my background is suppression of enemy air defense. So what that means is you fly into enemy territory, have their surface to air sights turn on, and then try to target you. And then you know where they are because they turned on. And now you have the RF moving at you. Rather than putting a human out there, you just do that thing across the space. And then whether they turn on or not, you're going to find them. And then now we know the what's called the EOB, the electronic order of battle. And now we know where the bad guy targets are. And then integrating with 5th gen and 4th gen, where we're able to all know the same information via that cloud.
So I'm clear. So you're flying particularly to trigger their like defense mechanism, so that way it starts to emit. I mean, that's a little so you're like a crazy guy. It's kind of like seems a little nuts.
Yep.
Is that correct? Okay.
It totally is. So it's called the Wild Weasel mission. The F-105, then the F-4 got it a long time ago. And the first guy who got briefed of the plan, so they said, hey, you're just going to go fly in, stimulate the IADS, the Integrated Air Defense System, get them to turn on, effectively be a juicy target to shoot at, and then defend yourself and shoot back after. And the guy said, you got to be shitting me. So Wild Weasels, they wear patches on their shoulder. I don't know if you've worked with any fighter pilots, but they have a little pencil patch. And it says YGBSM because that's what it stands for. And that's the Wild Weasel mission. It's there's more technology nowadays that makes it more survivable. Back then it was literally hey, start dancing around in the jet. Hopefully the missile
Right.
misses you, and then shoot back. So nowadays we have a ton of technology that can help us get them to radiate, find them either via satellites or something like this to now find the enemy locations. And it's not 4 hours old. Hey, we saw this piece of equipment at this location. I'm 70 miles away, flying at Mach 1, and I know exactly their location. It's going to be hard for them to get away. So I would bet very much so that they would want to be using it for something like that.
Yeah,
The
that makes sense. I
one
mean,
quite oh
no, sorry, go on.
oh I was just going to ask so the question I think about, because again, there's always a tactic, there's a counter tactic. Now we're talking smoke, clouds, fire. Like, how does this optical sensor, and obviously talking as much detail as you're comfortable with, but how does it handle all of those contested and degraded ops?
So yeah, so the I think the way to think about this is what we're trying to kind of achieve is we're trying to recreate like human vision and human cognition. So it's like, even so if you go back to the town where you grew up and you're standing on the corner of Main Street, and even if it's white out blizzard conditions, you still know where you are. Like you could navigate based on the snowbanks forming, and you see, oh, okay, that's the pink mailbox. Okay, yeah, okay, like that's like enough. So, and I'm not saying like the algorithms are like that's like to work in like blizzard, whiteout, snow conditions yet, but I think that's like the right kind of framework to think about it. That's what like deep neural networks are. They're trying to recreate that. You're teaching them based off of existing data. So if a human can recognize it, then the computer vision algorithm should be able to recognize it. So even if it was foggy, but you saw enough stuff, yeah, the vision algorithms would be able to do it. If you're in a total whiteout, blackout conditions, it's like not going to work. But there's kind of this 3D map. There's multiple technologies at play here. There's like this 3D map match technology. Then there's visual odometry, which is kind of like it's a more kind of crude method of visual navigation. So let's say this is like the camera sensor, and all of the pixels are like moving this way on the camera sensor. It means that you're going that way. So you could. It's not
Yeah,
that precise, but you could still get a sense of it until you get a highly confident 3D map match, and then it kind of like recalibrates the whole system to be like, oh, okay, you're actually over here now. And then there's also SLAM, which is kind of like building a new 3D map as the system's going through the location. And then there's also we're using an IMU as well. So all these things together make a pretty good. And then obviously, like if you have GS that use GPS, we kind of see it as it's
yeah,
like kind of a note on the symphony of PNT technologies.
I love it. I think that's what we need. Like, that is the stuff that gets me excited about doing the job, and because it's awesome. And that's, like you said, I just imagine it cruising around. It's like, I'm not sure where I am, but I know generically. And then it finds one piece on the ground. And it's like, yep, I know exactly where I am again. And we're back in business. And you think, and then if there's a swarm and they're all working together, now if one of them gets right, now they're all right. So I dig that a lot. So how is kind of the XR integrating into all of this? Like, are people beforehand, just like you're talking about at the beginning of the episode, hey, we are integrating or watching like a quadcopter fly the route of the camera? Are we now able to like see the swarm move through the space prior to the fight to assess our ability, our view?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the I think from like a high philosophical level, the things that I think we're trying to build are like we're trying to build elegant tools. Your iPhone is like super elegant. Um, the world is three-dimensional, and seeing things on a 2D map doesn't really cut it. I mean, it has worked, but like there starts to be new things, new and very beneficial things you could do when you start to like see the world like you see it as a human being in three dimensions. it becomes more intuitive. You can work with it much quicker. Um, I haven't really touched on this yet, but we also have a customer in the Space Force where we're building AR, VR tools to visualize and command and control satellite missions. And a satellite mission is like nothing but multi dimensions in space and time, and so it's essentially what you see in sci-fi movies of like somebody's looking at a hologram of the Earth, and there's like spaceship trajectories. That's essentially what we're doing. And seeing on a 2D screen isn't really enough. So that's not how humans are. That's not the world in which we operate daily. So a lot of the user interfaces are overly complicated on a two-dimensional screen because the world in which the 2D screens are trying to depict are 3D or oftentimes more than 3D. So there's just like a basic level of like operator efficiency and intuitiveness that you kind of get a benefit from an immersive environment. But on top of that, I think one of the things that like people kind of don't really get about AR, augmented reality, is that in order for AR to really work, you kind of need like Pokemon. People remember Pokemon Go. So the way you get like a holographic object to kind of like rest in a location and stay there is you need the camera system, like my iPhone, to like persist over space and time, so that Pokemon Go thing could live in that space. So it could like stay there stuck to the ground, so multiple sensors could recognize, oh, okay, that Pokemon Go ball is at the corner of this street. So you need kind of a mixture. So the augmented reality requires the computer vision to kind of make it work. So what we're doing with our visual positioning system is we're kind of building that foundational block where with camera sensors, we can recognize locations on the ground consistently and accurately. And then we could feed that data into a 3D holographic display to do all sorts of cool stuff. Flying drones, mission planning, projecting avatars of things going on in the real world into you could do essentially turning the world into like a video game, where you could do all sorts of cool, fun, and important things. Does that kind of answer your question a little bit?
It does. And I think there's, because there's a lot of people working in the AR, XR space, and everybody I talk to kind of says, hey, we are right now, the technology and the solutions today, like, are probably not going to be the end solution just because the technology is advancing so much. But I think with the computer, like image and being able to actually see things and comprehend and process, especially when we're talking about like an ABMS or a swarm type capability. I think there's so much there because you think right now we are, specifically in the fighter world, we take two-dimensional stuff. We draw on a whiteboard or we watch TV screens of three-dimensional fights in 2D. And if we're now able to interact with our fights beforehand, it's going to better prepare us for the fight. If we're able to debrief that fight in training better, it's going to make us better for tomorrow's fight. And I think that's the reality where with VR, XR, AR, all of the above, that has to be leveraged to make the training today better because we don't have enough people. We don't have enough training. We don't have enough flying going on. So, go ahead.
The training aspect is big. Like if you can make an interface that's really easy, requires less training, then that's huge.
Yeah. Well, I know you got a hard out in a couple minutes. So, Brian, I appreciate you taking the time. I had a great time. Hopefully we'll have you on in the future to hear more awesome stuff because it sounds like you're working on cool stuff. But thank you very much for being here.
My pleasure. Thank you.
All right. Everybody, if you want to contact us, info@kodiakshack.com. Reach out, tell us what we're doing well or what we're doing poorly. And then check out our website, kodiakshack.com. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Brian. See ya.
My pleasure. Take care.